thank you. We need to figure out how to get all this information out to people more permanently, because I saw people taking photographs, structures, etc. So we'll try and put this out as quickly as we can. So floor is open for questions. One here. Okay, lots of questions. Nobody at the back. Okay. So, when do you go ahead?
I will begin by making a few comments and add on some questions. See, JNN URM mission, the budget at today's present value would be more than 200,000 crores rupees. And the number of cities were not much larger. And if you will go into that data, you will find hardly anything new got created in cities across the country. So this budget is not that large. A scaling up has to take place. And the state representation being higher is good enough because the municipalities do not have revenues to actually do the work, new work. In the present structure of raising, taxes or raising revenues, they do not have wherewithal to find monies for that. So if the state pours in money, what it gets for the education sector, what it gets for the transport sector, what it gets for certain other such large things, it would be as well to scale it up. Now when you do make a comment about New Delhi, yes, NDMC area, 1,000 crores. The rest of the city is much, much bigger and much more messy, and nothing will happen there. So did the three corporations fail to project what they want to do, and they did not get selected to become a part of the smart city mission? What went wrong? Then there are foreign governments which have declared, United States has declared 3 cities, Germany has declared a couple of cities, France, Singapore, Japan. So what is their concept and how are they going to work? This has not been stated by you. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you can just come up to the microphone.
You can use this. Sorry.
It's a bit tough. Do you mind coming back?
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry to take the floor from you.
Please.
No, I'm just in a bit of a hurry because I thought I'd make 1 or 2 comments after listening to this. See, somehow one gets the impression that the city is something which is self-contained. It has a total identity of its own. It's like an organism like us. It's not. A city is completely dependent on its entire hinterland, and a huge amount of things are coming into the city. You know that when transport comes into Delhi at night, how the air pollution spikes by about 5 times. Now, one problem with the approach that you all have taken is that the number of things that's proliferating in each section is going into hundreds. How are you going to put this all together and derive anything out of it which is something like a new principle or a new idea on how to organize a city? So I just want to bring to your notice something that cities now at the moment in this mega city climate where the population is overtaking everything else, cities are in the same state that cities were built like a house for 5 people, and now there are 50 people in that house, and they're all screaming at each other. All right, that's what Delhi is. So what do we do? See, you have to take sustainability, which means self-sustainability. I don't mean sustainability like comes out in these documents, but it has to be self-sustaining on water, on farming, on vegetables, on so many things that have to be part of, on make sure the pollution isn't there by spreading it out, agriculture is there, dairy is there, it doesn't have to come from 50 kilometers away. And the moment you look at that, you immediately come to a very important concept, carrying capacity. Now, I don't know how smart you can try and be, but you can try and be very smart, it will end up in the hands of a few people. But without looking at the carrying capacity of the city and working out how you can make that city self-sustainable, I think these ideas are just going to be absurd. I'll just leave you with that proposition.
Thank you very much for the entire your study. But transport in the sense, if it has to be a smart city, the transport of private transport should not stop anywhere, for which technology has to be adopted. So that point is very important. And the next point which comes to my mind is that the international aid for various projects like sanitation and urban transport infrastructures is being given by a lot of agencies like Asian Development Bank and the lobbies of the other sectors like auto and others. So those have not been taken into account, and those are very important parameters because they also help us to push the government to get the things in order. And the metro in all cities is incurring a lot of expenditures, and the center has to provide the fiscal assistance to them. So that is why the smart city has to have the metro system or a rapid transport system. So these are some points I want to make.
So can we first just answer?
Quickly, first of all, it was a very interesting presentation, and it really brought home to certain points that we also knew of, but I think it encapsulates the entire picture very nicely. Thanks for that. Just quick points I want to just make. Instead of talking about everything else, we did a study way back in '93. That time I was in Vihai, called Delhi: A Tale of Two Cities. And that time only we had told that we have a garden city and a garbage city. NDMC was a garden city in '93, and entire MCD area in Delhi was a garbage city, right? So if NDMC is becoming a smart city, hey, two hoots about it, I think it was already a garden city way back. That's one. Two is, in your entire bar that it showed, if you see, like you're talking about Guwahati not having water, NDMC had nothing for housing. It's totally gone. And since we have been working with the homeless people, we have been seeing as to how the homeless are being chased out in the NDMC areas. These people are calling us every day that the police is not allowing them to be on the footpaths. There's a shelter for homeless in NDMC, in Bangla Sahib Gurdwara. I want to share here that this has been a trend for many years because there was one permanent building as a shelter for the homeless, which was, that time of course we had the UPA government, which threw out the women and children out of the place, and it was turned into a Palika Nilay, which means a Palika housing for the NDMC officials. So that's a big question, that in terms of the very housing, it's zero on that. Two is, that while we're coming with special purpose vehicle, there is also an NDMC Act, which talks about mandatory functions and discretionary functions. In the Act, it says very clearly that it's going to take care of the poor people in the NDMC area. So how come they can, subvert the entire Act and come with SPV? And so is there a way to challenge that? And then, you were talking about Chicago. Recently, just about 2 weeks back, I was in Chicago for a homeless meeting. And I was shocked to know there that they don't have any public toilets. Chicago has no public toilet. And thankfully, we are better still that in Delhi, we've got some 10,000 toilets coming up and all that. So Arvind is doing a great work. So what are we modeling? Thankfully, a person has gone there. I don't think he gets the wrong model. But I think, what are the thoughts in terms of, is NDMC that we had as a smart city is really, in fact, what's so big about it as such, and we're actually destroying by calling it smart city as such, and the final point is that, as you said, Manish, as you also showed in that, your bars, that much of the SPVs are going to be basically unelected people, right? The bureaucrats and all. And we are in a mess in this country because of that. So I think we are in real trouble if you are following that model as such for smart cities. Thank you.
So we have a bunch of statements. So do you want to respond to any of them, or should we just take more questions?
NDMC issue. So just to clarify again, the NDMC was chosen because it had a better revenue system than the other cities. So if you had cities with multiple municipalities, you tended to choose the one which was much better off. So I understand that it causes a lot of issues of inequity, but if we hold on to the NDMC as the example and talk about smart cities as a whole, we'll kind of miss the point of critiquing and actually problematizing the smart city mission, because it can quickly be pushed aside saying, oh, but you know, that was a sort of a one-off. So I value that, and as people who live in Delhi, that could be something that could be understood and questioned. But just for the questions that, I'm sorry, I must have not been clear enough before, it is imperative to understand the overall kind of structure in which financing and projects are. Just to see if there were any actual questions in that. Yeah, we'll come. Just one more thing. There is no aid coming in from foreign countries. These are loans. So we didn't cover them because there are no aids. It is actually a loan which is coming in. And we did put that in as PPP or CSR and loan or municipal bonds. We had that breakup.
So we had questions here, there. So if you could just move up to the nearest microphone when you're making that study. Go ahead.
I had a question. You were saying that there is more state representation in the SPV. Could you please elaborate that a little bit? What do you mean by that? Like, are there more bureaucrats, or and what does it really mean to have more state representation in something which seems to be more of a commercial or a venture or an enterprise?
So basically, if I wanted to know about the Greenfield cities that you'd mentioned earlier, which sort of got lost along the way. Is there an opportunity for such cities to be set up again? Because you were saying that there were about 100 cities that they were. And this sort of links to what Professor Soni was saying earlier about the carrying capacity of cities. If we have people moving to other cities, and perhaps the fate of these cities would sort of improve.
Thank you for the study. It was revealing a lot in terms of what are the kind of priorities that has gone into the SCM. Now, a few questions on the data itself, especially on the spending. A lot of the data that you put out is probably on the proposals front, right? How much are they going to spend on it? So how much has been spent already? Do you have data on that? If you have, could you please share that as well? And what are the, how much has been implemented in all of these so-called proposals? That's also a key indicator that we'd like to know, though it's been only 2 years or so since the Smart City mission. Then, coming to the larger concept of Smart City itself, and as gentleman earlier mentioned, comparison with the JNURM funds and the quantum of the funds available for infrastructure development or doing anything tangible in the long run across the city. It's hardly, I remember reading a Business Standard report sometime back which called it, is it a smart neighborhood project or a smart city project? And which is what is coming out from your study as well. So can we also start asking the government questions on, are you really building the capacity of the cities in terms of how are you fixing the governance problem? All of us have 30, 40 different issues in every city, key issues that we want solved. But the key, goes back to the governance issue. Are there, what is the political, structure of governing the city? How are the bureaucrats managing the city? Who are the staff? Are they understaffed or not? What is the data among? Yes, and what is the data on how many municipal staff do we have? What is the need for that, and all of that? And I saw that there's one Jharkhand Urban Planning Management Institute, which seems promising. But again, what are they actually trying to do? Is also we need to question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Banashri. Thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. But I think it raises more questions than, it gives explanations, because you sort of whetted the appetite of everybody to see what's happened to all this money, what's happening, like the question just now. that if we see central government, state government, local funding, private funding, do we know that in the in the last 2 years, which are the funds which are moving, and what is not really moved? So, and that information would be interesting. Second thing I think is that it was probably not part of your research. But what would be interesting to see what's happening to cities with all these various schemes coming. Like for instance, if there's smart city and there's Amrut in the same place, what is Amrut doing? How much investment is it putting in? So some of the questions that you're raising of the smart city and whether the rest of the city also is getting similar funding could perhaps be answered a little bit. Because the few cities that I've seen that what the cities are doing is that they are kind of projectizing the city, if you like, yeah, and putting in various components which they want into various schemes, yeah. So, I mean, is that really leading to some kind of holistic development, inclusive development, or what is happening, yeah? So, I think, and placing smart city within that context would, I think, make us a little kinder towards the smart city on one hand, and on the other hand, also resolve a lot of questions that you've been raising about, the city being, what's happening to the rest of the city, is it also going to develop, and so on. Thank you.
So on the SPV front, what the guidelines say at the moment is that you can have various shares. You have a 50-50 breakdown of center state as state/ULB, or you have 40-40-20 where you have center, you have state, ULB, and private representation. Private shares which are yet to come in, or like you can see the three. Now, what the graph actually showed was, out of the 35 cities which have provided data on, so there were two kind of data that was available to us. One was the certificate of formation of the SPV, and second was the board meeting that was convened to actually designate each of those members or whatever, even if it is interim, because at the moment they want to have some kind of private representation which hasn't come. They have some kind of interim representation. So within those members that were listed within the board meeting MOMs, we kind of listed down, we broke it down into the 4 posts that they have. They have a chairman, the SPV has a chairman, it has a CEO, and they have these board of directors, and they have some independent directors. Now, the board, so generally your chairman is a city municipal commissioner. In most of the cities, and all of them, apart from probably Port Blair, which is a union territory, everybody is a state. So we saw it in this way of who appoints them, and they ultimately are state civil servants, say state level officers. Secondly, if you look at the CEOs, in most cases, either the post is taken up at the moment by the same commissioner, or you have a divisional commissioner. So, or it's a development authority person, and so, and in the board of directors, generally what you have was the development authority representative. You had local self-government. So, if I could, and municipal commissioner, divisional commissioner, additional commissioner, and each of those were actually state appointees. Very few had. You would have mayors, you would have collectors, you would have standing committee chairmen, you would have city engineers, ward councillors were never mentioned in any of the cities. Now, independent directors were the whole bunch of unknowns because they kind of just listed them as urban experts, and the only place where gender plays a role, where they say at least one have to be, out of the 2 or 3 that they've listed, one has to be a woman. That's it. Apart from that, and when each of those designations are broken down into center, state, and municipal level, that's how the graph said that 56% of the 35 cities that are given are state level civil servants that have filled up the post. I hope that answers your question.
And just to, I think she gave a very good breakdown of who the SPV are, but I think also you asked the question of what happens to, what is the big deal with that? And I think that's the sort of takeaway I got from it. But a large part of this will be looking at area-based development, and you are basically improving a particular area without representation of the ward officers and with very minimal representation of elected representatives, and I think that was the issue at hand. One of the questions that was raised was about greenfield sites and whether there was a possibility to push for that that structure of urban development. I mean, I don't think that's a question for me to ask. That's a question you would have to ask either the cities themselves or the ministry. Largely, there is a movement away from greenfield sites because they are expensive. So whereas they might help with the carrying capacity, there is an issue of how expensive they are, whether it is viable, and do they actually work. There are very few cities that start from scratch that have worked. So there are sort of issues. And why we brought up the greenfield component was because when the BJP manifesto came out, they said 100 new cities, which was then made into 100 satellite cities. So they were going to sort of support existing cities, which again, that's still a very large investment. And you have a time when now when even SEZs aren't, so you have contracts of SEZs, permissions of SEZs being cancelled because they cannot implement them. So creating something from scratch is expensive, and I think that's one of the large components why, but again, this is speculative because we haven't actually interviewed. So this is just the first round of like studying the smart city mission. It's just looking at what the proposals are saying. So going forward, and going back to what Banushree said, this has whet our appetite because now we just have so much of information and we want to know more about the projects in particular. About spending, would you like to?
Yeah, about spending, what has actually happened? Not much. It's been 3 years, so the minister celebrated it, 2 years actually. Just last week they celebrated the 2-year anniversary. So the amount of money that was released, we know, it's about 2,445 crore or something out of the 50,000, which is the central share. So the 60 cities would, around 60% of 50,000 is what should have actually been released. But it's not been released because for a couple of reasons. One, an SPV has to be formed before this money is, because all the money is going to go into the SPV. Many cities took time to form SPVs, to constitute their boards, to have the first board meeting. In some cases, it happened as late as this March, a few months ago. So without those initial conditions, the government will not release funds under the guidelines of the mission. So that's one reason why nothing has happened on the ground. And the second reason, I guess, is also, it's just the cities are trying to figure it out in terms of, so there are certain options like we mentioned, PPP, loans. So they take time because probably in many cases they're doing it for the first time at the scale. And because the central government money is tied to what the city can put in, without the cities actually initiating some action, the central government will not release money. So because of a variety of reasons, nothing has happened. Nothing much has happened as of now.
Banushi's question was mostly about implementation and about the schemes which are, like the projects which are going on. Was there anything else that we've missed? So one of the components of the smart city mission is convergence. So you get your project proposal also also demonstrates how well you are able to pool together money from various schemes. So cities which have Amrut and Smart City and Hriday and Swachh Bharat and parts of JNNURM which are left over are not accidental, but it is you are asked to do that because it reinforces the amount of money you can pool into. But somewhere, and then this is a question I have which I haven't fully understood, I don't understand which is the starting point. So who puts the proposal first? Does Smart City say I'm going to get Amrut money? Does Amrut say I'm going to get Smart City money? It seems a little cannibalistic, and we're all eating off each other and saying that our budgets are this big. And perhaps the accounts are all perfect, but it's just an interesting concept for me because we've been talking about the differences between JNNURM and the Smart City mission. One of the components is that the finances are a lot more complicated here. Of the 60 cities, only one city floated the idea of municipal bonds, which is Warangal. And right now, 20 cities will be going forward and trying out municipal bonds. Pune has already started. NDMC is going to do it. So the finances are still shaping up. So it's part of it is going to be speculative as we go along, but we're just trying to understand what what information is out there already.
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
Right. Yeah, thank you so much for this empirical study, something which was really needed. I mean, the money trail and all are very interesting at their face value and perhaps even above my pay grade to comment upon. But if we take a step back and look at the history of ideas from which these fantastic ideas like smart cities emerged from, there has been tons and tons of writings, tomes written on cities, on urbanism, and the very epistemology of how infrastructure and citizenship work or do not work in different conditions. And why I'm making a sales pitch for that is because grid infrastructures, splintering urbanism do not work in India. That 20th century modernism critique belongs to 20th century. The imagination of how grids function has been like written to death. There have been writings and endless writings on how infrastructure works through patchworks and archipelagos in conditions of post-colony or the global south or developing world and so on and so forth. So there's a fantastic body in Delhi called GSDL, which was started by some in like Kapil Sibal decided that there needs to be geospatial mapping of the capital, and the body has more than 180 layers of spatial data from 10 years ago when Navyug did it with a collaboration from a US mapping company. The US company moved out, Navyug moved out of the project, and ultimately that data is sitting in Vikas Bhavan in Delhi. So if we don't take into fold the cultural logic of how these techniques work, civics has a tendency to run into its limits of face value and stalemates of accountability and transparency and so on. So just a benign suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may recommend, Orith Halpern has written a wonderful book called Beautiful Data, which might reveal the epistemic paradoxes in creating those data visualizations to understand that very mode of knowledge production is one of the foundations of how smart city came up as a concept. So, yeah.
Yeah. If you can just use the microphone, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I don't want to hold you accountable for how the mission was envisioned and implemented. I have two questions, pretty speculative. One is, so what do you think are the political priorities behind this? Is it to attract big capital? Is it to create elite pockets of exclusion? I mean, given what you've seen through and how you've read the empirical findings. The other thing is that if this is even somewhat replicable, what sort of an urban model are we moving towards? And, you know, what would that mean for citizens and for our rights to, you know, public services, amenities, institutions, infrastructure, as he was saying? Thanks.
Yeah, it's kind of related to the couple of questions that have come up. And I'm still confused about how the complex financial devolution takes place, given that there's, federal cooperation or not, and when it comes to, multiple administrative units, and also looking at urbanization as a processual question. We know how they've not really translated completely when it comes to, the urban units that are coming up, the townships that are coming up. How do you then look at how roles will be divided, the resources and allocation will be, coordinated, and more importantly, accountability question also arises given because of this, and you have a strong private presence as well, the private players that are present. And the second question is, does the modeling of smart cities and the, the planning incorporate and factor in migration? The migrants and their livelihoods, which in cities come up as informal sector, so to say. How is that going to be dealt with? Could you just rephrase your first question because it has three components? If you could just make it a question.
yeah, so how does, given that you said that there are cities wherein multiple programs are also there, and then how does the coordination take place, given that there is a very complex system of finance and the devolution of, say, municipal funds and so on and so forth?
Hi, thanks for sharing your research. My name is Jitendra. My question is, how different are the expenditures planned under Smart Cities mission from what was done earlier? I mean, if I ask a state, what do you want from us? I mean, let's say, what are the projects which are important for you? They'll look at the burning issues and they'll, I mean, put them in as projects, and they'll put forward for financial help. Now, how this would have been different maybe 10 years back, 5 years back, and I mean, if you presented a smart city mission, what difference had it really made? Because states are not expected to know because there's no definition what exactly is smart, right? Thanks.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead, why don't you, since we have... Yeah, one more question.
Okay. I think an excellent study by you all. I really feel that we have learned a lot. Couple of points. One is that we set about questioning whether this will solve the problem of urbanization that we are looking at, staring at 40% by 2030, 50% by 50, 600 million and 900 million urbanites. Is it really going to solve the problem? 5 issues raised. Is it really replicable, sustainable development, compact areas, environmentally sustainable, inclusive? Nothing of the sort. So are they really smart cities? Smart areas, smart portions of cities? What is smart about it? Is the question. 50% of most metros are slums or slum-like conditions. So are we really having our priorities correct? We required 39 lakh crore rupees to look at our infrastructure in the next 20 years, which includes the extra urbanization that's going to take place. That's as per the study, the high-level study that was done by Mr. Ahluwalia. India's annual budget is 21 lakh crores. So the amount of money that you really need to look at the first problem, which would aim at solving the problem of urbanization, is that amount of money. This almost 1,90,000, which has been bandied about yesterday, that we're going to spend on these so-called smart cities. The whole question should be not what does an Indian smart city look like? Is it smart city at all? Firstly, it's not a city. Is it smart? No. So I think we could go back to maybe whatever authorities who are ready to listen to us and question. We have not yet spent, thankfully, not more than maybe a couple of thousand crores. But are we going to spend this money for achieving what? If that question could be raised. So do you think that we are not on the right lines? I mean, what's your sense out of the whole, or is it too early to talk about it?
In terms of the political priorities, so again, we haven't talked to government officials, so what we're saying is by what we're looking at the project proposals, and at the most looking at press releases. So it wouldn't be fair to say that we understand why certain decisions were taken. It could be that the government thought that yes, if I give enough, I'm giving money for pedestrian spaces and I am ensuring that affordable housing is part of this smart city, and I'm putting meters in and I'm trying to make sure that ICT doesn't overtake it. I'm ensuring that there is some sense of equity and there's some sense of inclusion. So I wouldn't know whether there is a political push to make sort of segregated spaces or things, and I wouldn't feel, and I'm only speaking for myself, so I would let Ashwati and Ajay speak for themselves. I wouldn't be comfortable at this point in the research to make a statement beyond that. What I would say is that I think our government feels that urban infrastructure is expensive and that the cities need to pay for it, which comes to the sir's point, which is that it is expensive. So what they're trying to do is create systems which they think are sustainable. So you're going to have user charges when you have water, and you're going to have user charges for everything. And there are statements even in sort of the videos and the guides to sort of what a smart city mission should be for the bureaucrats. There is a statement saying don't put user charges very quickly and very fast. Slowly put them in so people get used to the change. But when I try to understand whether that's sustainable, what if I can't afford the user charges? Then do I not get water? Or will there be a process where you're cross-subsidizing me? Since we don't know that, I don't think it's fair yet to make a claim about it. But what we can, and again, this is not, I think, the purview of this work, because this is a think tank, it is to create the research. But if someone did want to take that forward, it would be to say that, can we raise that with the government or with the city bodies now, while they're implementing projects? And I think that is part of why we wanted to study this now. While it's going on, this data can be useful.
So the question was, I found it really interesting. Why would the government do this? So this is a complete guess, so please do not take it seriously. But I think like it's one of the learnings from JNNERM actually, where it was really hard. Implementing just funding projects through JNNERM, through these multiple levels of bureaucracies that we have, was hard. So I think it was a conscious decision to actually limit the problem size so that you'll have something to show at the end of 5 years, which seems to make the most sense to me. I don't think inequality was engineered. Like, I don't think the government wanted to create exclusive spaces, but I think they just wanted something to show by the time they went to elections the next time, which makes the most sense to me. But more interesting facet of that question is accountability. Now that you have this, what can you do? So even within ourselves, we were talking about, like, can you file an RTI to the SPV? And now many of you have seen what the projects are going to be. So if you're not happy with the project that the NDMC is implementing, can you change it? Can you petition? Can you file complaints to the SPV? So how do these things work are pretty interesting. Now that there is a model that the government has imposed for a variety of reasons, whatever logic that they were operating on, what can you do with it is very interesting to me. And I'm not sure how you can influence SPVs as a group of citizens, because it's not exactly a local body or a municipality. And like we saw, very few elected people are there on the board. So even if you want to reach out to a mayor or a councillor, they may not have much say in how the SPV is run. So that's more interesting to me. How do you, now that we have this, how do you influence the SPV? And we're not really sure about it. That requires more work.
Sorry to interrupt. It's not only what can be done. It's also questioning how can we undo things as well. Yeah, I mean, and on the slide, you mentioned the 74th Amendment, and the implications to that is something also we need to think about more.
Just to answer that one question, also in terms of undoing, there isn't a provision or any explanation of how a smart city mission a city can change the proposal that they've sent in, or what would happen if you didn't want to be a smart city anymore? What if you wanted to pull out? So, for instance, in the 60 cities, we keep mentioning one city has not formed an SPV, and that is Newtown, Kolkata, and that isn't because, and again, this is speculative because there is no formal, there are news reports about this with the West Bengal government stating that they do not want to be a smart city anymore, but neither the government of West Bengal nor the MOUD has come up with a statement saying that Kolkata is pulling out. But what Newtown has done is very simple. It hasn't created an SPV, and if you do not create an SPV, then you cannot route money through it. So there clearly isn't a guideline on how you can change it, but that doesn't mean it can't be there. Perhaps if there is a mobilization, there could be ways to change that. To go back to, I hope your question about finances was explained a bit, but you also asked about the accountability. Again, there is a mission. the mission has at the national, the state and the municipal levels bodies that are going to study the implementation of the smart city mission. They have largely bureaucrats on that body. There isn't information given about implementation yet, and we don't know what's happening. So we don't know what the accountability thresholds are going to be. In terms of migrants, there is, as you can see, some component of like hostels and rental housing. So in that sense, that part is thought of. There are spaces for vendors being created, but again, it's difficult to say that it is, well, yeah, so there is going to be slum redevelopment, but it's difficult to say that that will have a positive impact on those spaces, because all of these processes also often lead to eviction and lead to the formalization of spaces, and or if within an informal colony, for instance, if you do not have adequate paperwork to prove that you are from that colony, you might be evicted, and someone else, I mean, people with enough formality get to have a house. So it's difficult to see, just looking at the proposals, whether it will help or not help migrant workers. What we can say is that there is a component where they're saying they're trying to help, but there needs to be an understanding of what is happening on the groundwork, and that happens with implementation. About expenditure and how it was different earlier.
Oh, yeah. So I forgot the question about how the expenditure was different. Can someone just repeat? Yeah. What were you? In terms of JNNRM central schemes, or? Right. Right. Sure. I think the nature of the scheme's guidelines kind of determine at least certain spending priorities, not all, obviously. So what I mentioned about buses, for example, like a large section of most of our cities use public transit, the number of trips are through public transit. So ideally, if there was adequate participation and if people wanted it, you would assume that most people would want more buses on the road, right? That's an assumption. But because electric buses are seen as smart, there is also an aesthetic driver to what the money is being spent on. Does that answer your question? Like electric
buses and diesel buses, that's a small example.
Okay.
And if you compare the total expenditure, which you mentioned is more than 1 lakh crore.
Right.
So buses itself, I mean, this example itself doesn't explain the differences, because see, a city is evolving. Sure. Now it has experience with, let's say, it has experience of handling those buses, or maybe providing services through diesel buses. And now with time, the electric buses have become available now, right? Probably 10 years back or 5 years back, they were not affordable at all. And maybe they won't be economically viable even now, right?
So just so that I understand your question, are you asking how do cities determine what they should spend money on right now, and how smart cities is different?
I think the basic thing is, as you showed in your the diagram that sort of put together what the projects were, the two big components there were water and transport.
Sure. Okay.
And if you go back to JNNURM, you also find large components in water and transport, and that is what I think he's trying to make out, in the sense that there is certain continuity in the priorities of the cities, which the smartness of the smart city mission does not seem to have compromised. So the question therefore is, if you go a little deeper, then is the water that you see in the smart city mission very different from the water projects that you saw in the JNNURM, and the transport projects that you see in the smart city mission different from the ones that you see in the JNNURM? That's the, is that a fair summary of your question? Yeah?
There is a distinct difference in what the money was spent on in JNNURM and smart cities, but we need to do more work. Water, for example, is quite interesting. They are buying a lot of bulk meters and household meters, which weren't spending. So in JNNURM, what you would have done is lay pipelines. Right. Right.
Sure. The nature of expenditure has changed because of that reason.
Okay. We don't know that. So we can only say that the kind of things that money was spent on is different from JNNR. We don't know why it's different.
Yeah, a very good presentation. I have a question. So, was there a study or something which you looked at, is say the share of local taxes, or say a city, if it becomes smart, right, will it be able to become self-sustainable by becoming smart? So what I basically mean to ask is, will the city be able to generate enough fiscal resources locally in order to be less dependent on loan in a period of say 5 years, 6 years? Was that a thought process? I think because that should be something which should be studied if it is not studied. That is my one point, if you can revert to that. And second, housing for all was mentioned, right? So is there specific a thought which has been applied that, okay, fine, if a city is smart, it has to achieve more targets compared to the other cities in terms of ensuring that the housing for all target by 2022 is achieved? Thank you. Thank you.
Can just come up to the microphone, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dhruv. I'm a student from SPA Delhi. So one quick comment I want to make and a question as well. See, we talk about smart city missions and NDMC being not requiring the funding received. But a shift from the previous schemes is that it allows cities like Bhagalpur, Namchi, Imphal to get some money. Now, if you look at these cities, Bhagalpur basically lives on fair weather roads and hand pumps. So if they spend their amount of smart cities proposals on water and road, it's not a bad thing. Because if they develop roads, they can think of developing sewer lines under there. So if you could say classify your analysis by city size. So smaller cities have a different type of projects. The big cities have different projects. So maybe in that case we can analyze that smartness for a small city is different, and for a big city it may be different. So maybe you can add that to your research and analyze it a bit more so that we can have a better picture of how these things happen. Moreover, it is important because the recent census figures show us that the migration is moving from metros to small towns. So a competition-based selection for cities actually enables these small towns to receive some funding from the central government, which can help them manage their problems in a better way. It's a very small, or a preliminary analysis, but it might help in that sense. That is why it is better than the previous missions, and it is smarter in that sense. Thank you.
Ravindra,
I think the most critical thing for us to look at is how the money is going to be spent and who are the end beneficiaries of that expenditure. How is the money going to be recovered, and how does it kind of increase the level of indebtedness at the local body level? How is that money going to be paid back? If their source is only that of collection of tax, and this whole process of smart city development it's a kind of disruptive kind of move from the government to disrupt the 74th Amendment provisions for autonomous local bodies. If that is then taken out of the electoral arena and put into a corporate kind of mode of creating an SPV, then how does the municipality recover the loan? Who actually is indebted? Is the SPV indebted, or is the local body indebted? Who is going to pay the money back and how? I think that is the most critical question, because finally politics is about money. And how this money is going to play politics at the local level, finally, it will make sure that only certain people are elected. That money has to, if it has to survive, if it has to recover, it has to enter local politics. So finally, the amount of money that we spend in a ULB is going to determine what kind of ULB you have. In other words, it's a complete disruption of the known patterns of local body elections and electoral processes. So I think this is of great consequence, and I would strongly urge that to your wonderful study, you also add that dimension of how this money is going to play itself out finally at the local level. I think that's a very, very critical issue. To me, it appears to be the most critical issue. Thank you.
Can I take those questions? So I'll just club those two questions about financial sustainability and what it does for municipal budgets. So one interesting thing I think Persis mentioned over the course of the talk is the cities were selected initially by the state based on how good their municipal finances were, which were then sent to the central government. Basic things like the size of the budget, whether the budget was audited in the previous 2 years. So that was a short list that the states decided, which then further sent it to the MOUD, which made this list of 100 cities, the initial list of 98, sorry. So the presumption is that they at least looked at two things, which is the size of the municipal budget, whether it was audited. But what we started looking at over the last 1 week is what does it say about financial sustainability? For example, the size of the budget doesn't say anything about things like the amount of indebtedness, whether they can pay back their loans, whether they have completed the projects that they have undertaken, the capital expenditure that they've undertaken in previous years. We need to look into this. Our understanding is this didn't figure too much into the SCM, into the dynamics of who got selected. But I think this is critical, like both of you have mentioned. I can just give you one example. A friend of ours works as a consultant for the Aurangabad Smart City SPV. Aurangabad's annual municipal budget is 400 crore. Their smart city budget is 1,700 crore. And the private consultants have been asked to raise a further 1,700 crore to take it to 3,400 crore. And the municipal budget, annual budget, is 400 crore. So the questions that you ask about, like whether they'll be able to pay back, whether they're going to go bankrupt, these are all critical questions. We just don't know. It's too early in the game to tell any of this. But like you mentioned, it's an important component, and we think the competition should have involved some kind of financial sustainability on whether these cities can pay back the money that they claim that they're going to raise. We don't know if due diligence was done on that front. We need to look into it further. I'll just respond to his question. It is true that the size of the city does have a major role to play on what kind of projects might be most relevant. So we have categorized the cities based on size. We have just not looked at what they are spending on in depth, but it's something that we have thought about, and we will do that in the future.
So are these private consultants allowed to pick up the money for the respective smart city project from the market, apart from the municipal bonds, or municipal bonds is the only avenue of going to the markets?
There is also PPP, there is CSR. In some cases, the private consultant itself is a company which has promised to spend money on certain projects in the city. So they are the project management consultants, but they'll also implement certain projects. So there are a variety of means through which private money is going to flow in. But the point is, how are you going to pay back is an important question. We just don't know yet because not even the projects have started, and it's very hard to say at the moment.
So, thank you. As you can see, a nice beginning. I was just wondering, with all those graphics up there, how do we produce something that will do justice to that work? So that is a conversation that we will have later. So, we hope to make this data available in the public domain relatively soon, and so that as you guys sort of go through, you'll be able to then start using some of this material and point out flaws, put in additions. Individual citizens can monitor how specific projects in their areas are doing, etc. So if you're able to do that, that would be something that we can do. And thank you all for coming, and hope to see you again at the next workshop.